The modern metagame has such a big problem in it right now, and no one is talking about it. Everyone is falsely accusing the wrong cards, the wrong decks. And I want to present to you two arguments that will eventually lead to my ultimate finality of the card that I think is posing the biggest threat to the diversity and the evolution of the modern format. And just on the cusp of Modern Horizons 3, I think it's important to touch on why we need to provide answers and provide solutions to cards like this in bannings or unbannings, because it's really hindering the way that the modern format can evolve outside of these soft rotations in the Horizon sets. Now, firstly, with timestamps down below, so feel free to skip ahead. I want to use my first argument to one that's been historically around, and that is around the fact that there are almost no typo strategies in the modern format right now. I want to use this through the Goldfish metagame analysis. I'm going to also use the Wayback Machine as a way to look at the Goldfish kind of metagame historically. But firstly, let's look at the last 2 months and some of the registrations of historically well-known typo strategies. Humans, firstly, I've used Mantis Rider as a unique card, although we see it in Domain Zoo here. Only registered a handful of times, less than you can count on two hands in the modern metagame. Out of all paper events that we can record and just kind of online events, 5-0s and challenges, Humans hasn't been doing too well. If, registration is one thing, but just in general, hasn't been doing too well. In terms of Azorius Spirits, it's just less than you can count on one hand, and it was on the same event they were registered in June. To be fair, these two people could be friends and might have registered it as a meme. The fact that it's the same event is hilarious to me. So yeah, just not been doing well, if at all, registered in general. Next up is Merfolk, and this one gets a slight boost, and he's a good exception actually. With the Pro Tour Lord of the Rings results, there was a Merfolk player that actually did really well in the constructed element of things. So Merfolk has been around for a while, and I think it primarily gets to take advantage of, well, not only Force Negation, but Island Walk. As we know, as formats get older, Island Walk just becomes insane. The more powerful formats get, we understand that blue is the top of the roost in many situations, unlike modern for now. But Island Walk is an insane thing to take advantage of. Great combat evasion. It just nullifies any combat math that your opponent can even wish to do, so they have to rely on removal on key lords to get there. The last deck that I want to highlight is one that's still around in the meta, and one that people actually do consider a creature strategy, but I think falls under the Death Shadow and Murktide blanket, where it's not necessarily a creature tempo deck using hand disruption and counter magic to find its way through the removal and interaction, but more so uses non-creature spells to enact its final game plan, getting you down to 0. And Domain Zoo does that through the use of Tribal Flames. The reason why it's called Domain is because of this card. And playing 4 Lightning Bolts and 4 Tribal Flames, I mean, you can get there with your non-creature spells in your lands. You don't really need your creatures, and the creatures are there essentially to provide extra damage and provide a distraction to cards like Tribal Flames that come out of nowhere. Once you've answered the Territorial Kavu or the Scion of Draco, Tribal Flame comes out of nowhere and deals 5 damage to you twice, and then all of a sudden you're going to game 2 or the next match. So I think the creature decks are really subtracting in terms of placements and registrations in the last 2 months, and we can even see this historically again through the Wayback Machine. We see that in January of 2021, right almost a couple months before the printing of Modern Horizons, we see decks like Heliod Company, Eladamri's Toolbox, Death and Taxes, and even old combo decks like Ad Nauseam around. Although not creature related, I think it's important to highlight some of the old decks that aren't around. But this was also a busted metagame with Uro and Loros at the top of the roost. Hammer Time was actually a relatively new strategy. It still was around then too, but a creature combo deck nonetheless, and creature decks that were able to rely on their creatures primarily. We then, right before, I should say, June 13, days before the printing of Modern Horizons 2, we saw Dredge as a graveyard strategy that took advantage of creatures. We had Jund Death Shadow, Orzhov Stoneblade, Heliod Company, still, even Eldrazi Tron, I would say counts as that, although following the similar lines of a Tron scam, taking the top of the roost and being able to rule as one of the best decks in some of the best decks in the format, although we still don't see typo strategies as of 2 years ago. One that's changed, something that's changed because the original printing of Modern Horizons, still creature decks are around. Now, if we go to January of 2022, Death Shadow, Jund, Jund Luros was more so a creature deck, Yawgmoth being a creature combo strategy, Prowess being an aggro deck using creatures, a lot of these creature strategies we're now seeing shifting to combo focused, or like creature decks that use non-creature spells, aggro decks like Prowess, to enact its game plan. We even saw that, of course, with the historically, if we back up here with the Hammer Time decks. Heliod Company is a combo deck. Aladamri's Toolbox can be seen as a combo deck as well. But primarily creature-based strategies were still around, but we're seeing their true shift into combo strategies now, especially June of last year as well. We're seeing Crashing Footfalls solidify itself, Elementals, Murktide, Affinity being a typal strategy. Is Artifact Typal, I should say, still even considered a typal strategy? Look, using one of the more busted mechanics in the modern metagame, whatever. And then finally, with January of this year, we're seeing a true solidification of what we see now: Living End around, Amulet Titan here and there, Omnat decks, Murktide, Rakdos midrange, still at the top of the metagame at 8%, gonna double thanks to the printing of one of the more recent sets, Lord of the Rings and Orcish Bowmasters, taking now the top of the roost with Murktide region at 17%. We still saw Hammer at 11 or 12% of the modern metagame, so it wasn't as crazy. We still saw like 17, 11, 8, 6%. These percentages were actually still high, but thanks to one of the more recent printings, we saw the solidification of Rakdos midrange, Rakdos scam, which is going to be my second argument. The fact that creature decks aren't around, and the fact that the modern metagame is now represented by Rakdos scam at 17%. It represents almost double the next represented modern deck in the metagame. Crashing Footfalls at 9%, Mono Green Tron at 8%, Burn at 7, 5, 4, 3. Like, Rakdos midrange, Rakdos scam almost represents 2 to 3 times more than the next best modern deck, which is absolutely insane. And part of this representation is also part of the problem. It highlights one of the bigger problem cards in the modern metagame right now. And I want to go over why Rakdos scam is also argument number 2 as to what needs to change in the modern metagame and what card needs to go. Firstly, with Rakdos Evoke, the primary plan is to take advantage of the Evoke mechanic to bring back free spells and reuse their abilities, or just have like a big threat that is really hard to deal with. Whether it be Grief on Menace or Fury with Double Strike, it's really hard to block these reanimated creatures. And a lot of times with Fury, it clears the way. With Grief, it takes your best cards. And I think that's part of the problem. So Grief being that front-facing issue, with Orcish Bowmasters kind of dealing with Ragavan in some way, and Ragavan just being one of the best 1-drops ever printed in Magic's history, it already has the suite it needs to be powerful, but Grief and Fury highlight that and exacerbate that in many ways. With, again, 17% of the metagame, Jake Beardsley even took it. One Pro Tour Lord of the Rings against Christian Calcano on Mono Green Tron, which is arguably another scam, a historical scam, with 3 lands producing 7 mana. Jake Beardsley took advantage of one of the key interactions, being that Feign Death brings back Grief after you evoke it. And what Grief does is it takes your 2 best cards. And this, I really want to highlight this. Not a lot of people are talking about the fact that Grief not only thought seizes you Tice, it takes your 2 best cards. Usually the pattern is that Grief comes down and takes the first card that can answer the Grief. Maybe it takes like a Fatal Push or a Solitude or whatever it might be. And then it takes, after you get reanimated, takes your next best play, whether it be your turn 1 play, a card that can answer it again. It takes your 2 best cards and then says to you, I have a 4/3 with Menace. What are you going to do about it? Almost nothing. The first creature you play can't even block it thanks to the Menace. It then is going to play a suite of Orcish Bowmasters, Ragavans, Blood Moons. Like, there are so many things that this deck can do to then further take advantage of you, and really highlighting the fact that Grief takes your 2 best cards is absolutely insane. But I don't think Grief is the problem. I think some of you already know where I'm going with this now. Now with these 2 arguments set in place, the real problem with the modern metagame is Fury. And I think Fury has been stifling the creativity and the evolution of the modern metagame, and has really stuck it, and in my opinion, really stagnant place, because so many decks have to work around this. Typal and creature strategies in general have to work around Fury and Solitude. Solitude less so. Solitude has pushed out Death's Shadow for a large part, but taking out one creature is very different than taking out multiple. Especially when you reanimate it, you get the ETB twice. So even if you don't Fury and scam on turn 1, if you know you're playing against a Merfolk strategy, if you're playing against a human strategy, you might just hold back that scam and just say, well, once they play out their board a bit, I can Fury and deal 8 damage divided as I choose amongst all their creatures with my scam. Fury also provides that consistency factor to the scam matchup, representing 17% of the metagame for the third or fourth time that I'm saying that. And we're going to see that in a little bit of math that we're going to do right now. If we take MTG Nexus's multivariate calculator, Jake Beardsley's list plays 6 copies of the reanimation spell, so Feign Death and Malakir Rebirth. And then you play 8 elementals, 8 evoke elementals that you can scam out. If you calculate that, that is 33%. That means that 33% of the time, card A, reanimation spell, will be drawn with card B in a 7-card opening hand. That means 1/3 of the time in an opening hand, you will be scammed by Rakdos scam. That number is absolutely bonkers. No one takes that into account. 1/3 of the time that you play against scam or you play scam, you will be able to scam your opponent. Get a 3/3 with double strikeout or Thoughtseize your opponent's best cards. Now, if we even went to 8 reanimation spells, the number gets wild. 40% of the time, almost 50% of the time. But if we lost Fury, and with Jake Beardsley's is 6 and 4, number goes down to 19. 1/5 of the time is much better. 20% of the time, 1/5 of the time is a much better number to deal with. And it might not even be one of the primary parts about this deck. They might shave and go down to like 4 copies or 3 copies, because now it's not one of the bigger parts of the deck, but it can still happen. The scam can still happen. You still play it. 11%, 10%, 1/10 of the time, 10% of the time, 1/10, I can't even do math right now. 10% of the time, you're going to be able to scam your opponent. If we were to get rid of Fury, the modern metagame would not only be able to bring back creature-based strategies in a wide form and allow removal to mean something again, but it would also shut down one of the most egregious modern strategies that we've ever seen. And it may not be one of the most busted. That's not what I'm trying to say. It's not better than the Uro control deck. It's not better than Luros decks. But it is 17% of the metagame. And it's extremely difficult to answer. It is extremely frustrating to play. And 1/3 of the time, you will not get a game, because they will just be able to get Fury out and destroy your creatures. How do you destroy a double striking creature like this at 5 mana? Can't even push this thing. Prismatic Ending? No. Absolutely not. And Grief just taking your best cards. I think eliminating Fury and banning Fury out of the modern metagame would bring back the further diversity that modern players are looking for. And although modern is very diverse right now, I think allowing creature-based strategies, Aether Vial strategies to return in the modern metagame and eliminate the feel bad of having Rakdos Scam being one of the best decks in the format is a net win. And with the onset of Modern Horizons 3 coming next year, I think it's only fair that we see a shift, as Preordained was not enough. Preordained, well, the crowd went mild, I think is what we can all say. And I think a ban out of this deck was important. I think Fury was the card to touch, because Grief is still fine, as in terms of it still feels bad, but percentage wise, it just wasn't happening a lot. Even before the Urkish Bowmaster's printing, Rakdos Evoke was up there. It just wasn't happening a lot. So if you took out Fury, I think you take out that consistency, because now it's not only just Fury and Orcish Bowmasters dealing with all your creatures and your planeswalkers. You only just have Orcish Bowmasters and Grief to do that. So that is the ultimate finality of this video. I think Fury is the biggest problem that the modern metagame has had in years. I think it needs to be banned, and I think it will be a net positive on the modern format if it gets banned, as I mentioned. Now, let me know what you think in the comment section down below. Am I completely off base? Have I missed an argument? Am I just missing the big picture that all of you are seeing? Is the card that we need to ban not Fury? Is it Renin 6? Is it a combo piece out of the Cascade decks? I don't know. Let me know in the comment section down below. I'd love to hear what you think about this video. And I guess as we approach Modern Horizons 3, I hope one day we can find an answer to, well, Rakdos Scam, because I am so sick and tired getting scammed out of this format.